Elias Winter's Language Matters Substack, a comprehensive analysis. Introduction. Elias Winter's Substack newsletter, Language Matters, emerged in early 2025 as a series of piercing essays on the decline of American empire and the crises of meaning in modern society. Winter, author of the book The Lie We Refuse to End, brands himself as writing from the edge of empire, where language collapses and clarity becomes resistance. In just a few months, he published dozens of essays, all free to read, that together form a cohesive body of work. His About page describes his style aptly, with the rage of a prophet, the precision of a political economist, and the mourning of a poet. Indeed, Winter's voice is passionate and prophetic, blending moral fervor with analytical depth and poetic sorrow. This report reviews all his Substack essays, distilling key themes, arguments, and messages, and evaluates the overall worldview he communicates. Additionally, we assess Winter's writing quality, originality, coherence, and the engagement or influence his work seems to foster. Major themes and arguments in Winter's essays. 1. Collapse of empire and moral decay. A unifying theme across Winter's essays is the impending collapse of what he calls the American empire, a decline born of moral evasion, societal denial, and failed leadership. He frequently cites stark indicators of decay, for example, $36 trillion in federal debt, rising not from scarcity, but from moral evasion, a collapsing demographic pyramid we paper over with shadow. Winter argues that the ruling class pursues profit without responsibility, leading to collapse cloaked in ideology. In The Pretentious Monkey and the Aging Empire, April 17, 2025, he uses the metaphor of a pretentious monkey to critique how America's aging population and declining birth rates are ignored or masked by cultural denial. Similarly, in You Can't Have the Checks Without the People, April 29, 2025, subtitled On Aging, Immigration, and the Choice a Dying Empire Refuses to Make, Winter contends that an empire cannot sustain its welfare promises, the checks, without people, a direct commentary on demographic decline and immigration policy. This economic and demographic pessimism ties into a broader moral message. America is in spiritual decline, failing to confront hard truths. Winter's first book, The Lie We Refuse to End, expanded on these essays, suggesting that our society is built on unsustainable fiscal and moral falsehoods. In one essay, he writes, "Every generation believes it is living through the end of something. The darkness is darker," conveying a sense of civilizational end times. Yet Winter's purpose is not despair for its own sake, but a call to acknowledge reality. He believes that only by facing uncomfortable truths, debt, aging, decay, can any renewal begin. His tone in these empire-focused essays is urgent and admonitory, as if sounding an alarm to wake a complacent society. Second, language, narrative, and propaganda. True to the name Language Matters, Winter fixates on how language and stories shape power. A core argument is that our narratives, in media and politics, are often manipulative, serving to uphold empire and injustice. Winter seeks to unmask propaganda and demand clarity. For example, in The Empire That Needs Our Silence, June 2025, he responds to a New York Times foreign affairs piece about Iran. Winter excoriates the article as imperial scripture masquerading as foreign correspondence, arguing it invites passive sympathy while sharpening Western knives. He calls out 6 patterns of narrative bias: paternalism, selective empathy, false balance, erasure of Western culpability, condescending moralization, and cynical simplification that manufacture our consent for endless war. Through detailed analysis, he shows how language can teach us who deserves pity, who deserves bombs. Winter's overarching message: the stories we are told, often by elite media or government, cloak power dynamics and dull our moral clarity. Thus, clarity becomes resistance. By plainly naming these narrative scaffolding, he believes we can reclaim truth and agency. This theme also appears in essays like The Oracles of Our Undoing, May 15, 2025, in which Winter criticizes the fraudulence of AI prophets and the credulous narratives around artificial intelligence. He specifically takes columnist Ross Douthat to task, accusing him of cowardice for, in Winter's view, accepting facile stories about AI's future rather than confronting deeper human responsibilities. Winter insists AI is not a god, not a mind, and that its threat lies not in science fiction autonomy, but in how we choose to use it, again emphasizing truthful framing over grandiose myth. Across these pieces, Winter positions himself as a guardian of language's integrity, striving to strip away euphemism and spectacle. He often writes in declarative, aphoristic statements that read like moral proclamations. For instance, responding to social media debate lords, he writes, "The quickest path to influence is not depth, it is velocity. The machine feeds on the spectacle of dominance, not persuasion, not synthesis, but the illusion of defeat." This critique of the platform economy and its effect on discourse is central to Winter's worldview. Our public language has been corrupted by algorithms and performative outrage, and regaining honest language is prerequisite to cultural renewal. 3. Spectacle, social media, and the death of meaning. Hand in hand with his focus on language is Winter's alarm at how technology and social media are eroding meaning. Several essays examine what he calls the age of spectacle, a constant flood of content that prioritizes attention over truth. In The Death of Meaning, a case study in algorithmic erasure, June 23, 2025, Winter recounts a harrowing personal narrative of being drowned out by bots. He explains that Substack initially felt like a safe haven for genuine voices, a last refuge, a platform where the voices of the exiled, the critical, and the deeply personal could still matter, a sanctuary. But then he noticed a wave of algorithmic imposters. Hundreds, then thousands, of new accounts, producing writing in a voice that seemed borrowed from mine. Hollow, but eerily precise, as if an AI had scraped my essays and regurgitated the style. Real engagement vanished as his work was buried under noise, and posts even began to taunt him with distorted echoes of his own words. This unsettling, quasi-paranoid account blurs reality and metaphor, whether literally true or an exaggerated parable. It dramatizes Winter's thesis that algorithm-driven content can silence authentic voices not by overt censorship, but by saturation. This was a new form of erasure, not silence, but saturation, he writes. The algorithm had turned against me, not through censorship, but through dilution. Winter portrays the Internet as a hall of mirrors that can break a thinker's sanity by mimicking and overwhelming them. While intense, this tale reinforces his broader argument about the spectacle, the digital fog that buries truth. He suggests we live in an era where reality itself is manufactured and genuine meaning is drowned in an ocean of tiles of content. In The Flood and the Silence, another essay referenced as a meditation on algorithmic censorship, spiritual fatigue, and the architecture of digital forgetting, Winter likewise explores how the deluge of information can function as repression. Winter's cultural commentary often invokes Neil Postman's idea of amusing ourselves to death or Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, but he brings it to life with visceral personal experience and up-to-the-minute concerns about AI. He laments that we scroll, we swipe, we ache, connected in appearance but spiritually starved, and that much of what passes for online activism or discourse is just spectacle disguised as justice. One especially scathing line encapsulates his stance. The Internet is destroying the world. Tribalism masquerading as compassion. Spectacle disguised as justice. Inclusion used as a muzzle. Winter is uncompromising here. Our digital habits are not merely frivolous, but civilizationally deadly, corroding our capacity for truth and empathy. This bleak view of the online world underscores why Winter prizes clarity so highly. To him, writing is an antidote to disorientation. It's worth noting that Winter even admits some of his own essays were generated with the help of AI, showing he's not naive about the technology's presence in writing. But he wields that fact as an existential question. If even our prophets, himself included, use AI, how do we discern authentic voice from mimicry? Such introspective challenges give his work a paradoxical depth. He is both a critic of the system and, at times, an unwitting participant, which adds nuance to his warnings. 4. Loneliness, exile, and the erosion of community. Beyond geopolitics and media, Winter returns frequently to the intimate human cost of modernity. Pervasive loneliness, disconnection, and loss of meaning. In The Architecture of Loneliness, June 8, 2025, he argues that the epidemic of loneliness is structural and manufactured, not merely a private malaise. There is a wound beneath the noise of the age, the essay opens. It is not new. It is not accidental. It was built. Winter traces how, over centuries, communities and nets of kinship were dismantled in favor of towers, of capital, of spectacle, of digital artifice. What we call loneliness today, he says, is not a mood. It is not a private failure. It is a condition, structural, civilizational, mass-produced. Drawing on anthropology and history, he reminds us that for most of human existence, to be alone was to be sentenced, and the sentence was exile. Solitude meant literal death, and humans evolved to need the tribe. Modern life, however, has captured the human condition by the machine, tricking our ancient social instincts. Never have people been so virtually connected, yet so physically and spiritually severed. Never have so many been so connected in image and so severed in substance. The machine that promised presence profits from absence. Winter's writing on this theme is particularly poignant and poetic. He vividly describes how our bodies still react to isolation with panic and stress responses suited to a hunter-gatherer band. Yet our society normalizes the isolated individual. He positions loneliness as not just personal pain, but as a tool of control, an architecture deliberately or inadvertently built by modern systems that profit from atomized, anxious individuals. This analysis extends to The Age Without Elders, May 31, 2025, where Winter examines the collapse of intergenerational bonds and the loss of true elders in our culture. We have information, we have spectacle, we have performance, but we do not have elders, he writes bluntly. He distinguishes mere old people from elders, who traditionally were custodians of meaning and community wisdom. Modernity, he argues, broke the chain of transmission. The young are spiritually orphaned in a wasteland of algorithmic content, while the old are sidelined or infantilized. Without true elders, wisdom is lost to data. Virtue is lost to branding. Rites of passage dissolve. Maturity is delayed indefinitely. Winter traces this rupture from Enlightenment rationalism, which devalued traditional wisdom, through technological acceleration. The result is a society unmoored and unable to endure crisis because it has lost the glue of shared meaning across generations. Through these essays on loneliness and elderhood, Winter's worldview comes into focus. He is fundamentally a communitarian moralist, lamenting how modern liberal capitalist society has eroded the communal, spiritual, and face-to-face aspects of life. His work often mourns what has been lost, the circle of voices, the touch of familiar skin in the night, while issuing a warning that a society so severed cannot last. Notably, Winter often includes himself in these diagnoses. He speaks of exile from personal experience. Having lived in multiple countries, he references Canada, Ireland, and America as fathers that abandoned him. He writes as one who personally never really belonged. This gives his essays a heartfelt, at times confessional tone beneath the grand analysis. 5. Personal responsibility, courage, and witnessing. Despite painting a dark picture, Winter's message is not one of surrender. A recurring motif in his writing is the call to bear witness, to see and speak the truth, even if one's voice trembles in the void. In his deeply personal open letter, "Why Have You Forsaken Me, Father?" June 12, 2025. Winter addresses both his own father and, metaphorically, the older generation or paternal figures of society about the sorrow of the last decade. He describes watching America begin to fall as he came of age and pleads simply for witness. I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to witness it, to know what it felt like. Throughout this poignant piece, Winter equates love with the courage to face reality together. Love is not compliance. Love is not silence. Love means telling the truth and getting nothing back, he writes. Love means writing when no one reads, speaking when everyone flinches. This credo underlies all his essays. He even defends his pseudonymous alter ego, saying, Elias is not a performance, he's bearing witness. Because if I don't speak, the silence will kill me. Winter's worldview thus contains a deeply moral and quasi-spiritual conviction that speaking the truth and refusing comforting lies is both an act of love and a mode of survival for the soul. His final essays demonstrate this resolve. In The Sheet Cake and Prophecy, an imaginative dialogue published around July 1, 2025, Winter writes a scene of his neighbor, Mrs. Greenblatt, humorously chiding him for his doomsaying. The neighbor jokes that his Substack gave her insomnia and teases him for writing about anything that isn't falling apart. The piece is meta-commentary, a rare moment of self-deprecating humor in Winter's oeuvre, but it reinforces his mission. Even as Mrs. Greenblatt urges him to lighten up, she admits, I read every word. I argue with you in my head. I'd rather have you ranting about empire and loneliness at my table than pretending everything's fine. In the story, Winter quips that someone should keep a record if the world is ending, to which the neighbor wryly agrees that prophets like him burn a lot of calories being serious. This conversational vignette highlights Winter's self-awareness. He knows his writing can be heavy and unrelenting, yet he believes deeply in its purpose of naming the pain, even if it earns him no reward. Ultimately, Winter's overall message and worldview could be summarized as a plea for truthfulness and moral clarity in an age of collapse. He advocates looking unflinchingly at hard truths, whether about our nation's decline, our fraying social fabric, or our own fears, and responding not with nihilism, but with witness and love. There is an undercurrent of hope in that stance, the belief that honesty and human connection, even if just through one writer and one reader, still matter and can perhaps ignite change, or at least preserve dignity as darkness falls. Notable evolution over time. Although Elias Winter's Substack spanned only a few months, one can trace a development in emphasis and approach over the course of his essays. Early on, March-April 2025, Winter's writings fixated on the macro dimensions of decline: fiscal insolvency, demographic crisis, cultural decadence. These initial essays, e.g., The Lie We Refuse to End, Pretentious Monkey and the Aging Empire, To Love a Nation is to Know Its Ghosts, The Covenant and the Cut, and others in April, established the broad thesis of American collapse and moral failure. They often leaned heavily on economic and historical analysis, reading somewhat like social critique with a prophetic tone. Around mid-May 2025, Winter's focus broadened to more philosophical and spiritual topics: the role of narrative and language, architecture of manufactured reality on May 14th, the threat of AI to meaning, oracles of our undoing on May 15th, metaphors of mirrors and self-deception, the face in the flood, and the face that hated its mirror, mid-May. He also experimented with form and storytelling during this period. For instance, All Fours, on the war between flesh and story, June 13, 2025, is an essay interwoven with fiction and metaphor, beginning from the perspective of a cow named Margot on a farm, then transitioning into a meditation on how humans lie to themselves about not being animals, and even delving into a candid scene about anonymous intimacy and the search for authenticity in Chapter 4. This mix of narrative and expository writing shows Winter's literary range and a shift to more experimental, introspective modes as time went on. By June, Winter was also reacting directly to current events and media, as seen in his June 30th essay answering the NYT piece on Iran, bringing his theme of empire propaganda to a contemporary context. During late June, his tone grew even more personal and urgent. Why Have You Forsaken Me, Father? June 12th. And The Death of Meaning, June 23rd. Both read like cri de coeur. One a raw appeal to be seen by his own father and generation. The other a quasi-journal of a psychological breakdown via the internet. These pieces suggest that Winter was feeling the strain of his own message. The loneliness and exhaustion he wrote of were perhaps catching up to him in reality. It is telling that after a prolific burst of nearly daily essays, Winter abruptly announced a hiatus. In his final brief post, A Note Before Silence, he declared, "I will not delete the archive. These essays were written in earnest, and I will not disown them, but I will not publish for the foreseeable future." He emphasized that the work was never about me, and hinted that perhaps stepping back was necessary to preserve the truth of his message. This farewell note, coupled with the semi-fictional sheet cake dialogue, where a neighbor lovingly urges him to live a little, indicates a shift from fiery proclamation toward a more reflective pause. The prophet figure, after delivering dozens of warnings, decided to fall silent, at least for now. In summary, Winter's Substack began with outward-focused societal critique, moved through increasingly creative and inner-focused explorations of meaning, and culminated in a merging of the personal and political. Over time, he revealed more of himself, his exile, his fears, his need for witness, and toyed with different voices: scholarly analyst, storyteller, memoirist. What did not change was his core conviction in naming uncomfortable truths. If anything, his message sharpened and internalized, from "here is what's wrong with our world" to "here is how it feels inside one man who truly sees it." This progression gave his Substack a narrative arc of its own, an intellectual and emotional journey through despair, insight, and ultimately humility, in the face of silence. Tone, style, and intellectual orientation. Elias Winter's tone is singular and intense. He writes in a lofty, almost sermon-like voice that nonetheless carries deep sincerity. The mood of his essays is often one of mourning, sorrow for a world in decline, yet underscored by anger at those he deems responsible, corrupt elites, complacent masses, and by urgent moral clarity. Readers have described his pieces as having an Old Testament prophet vibe, and indeed Winter frequently invokes religious or mythic imagery, e.g. covenant, exile, temple, prophets, flood. The cadence of his writing is rhythmic and emphatic. He favors short, declarative sentences and rhetorical repetition for impact. For example, in critiquing Ben Shapiro's debate style, he piles on clauses like a high verbal, low embodied intellect, addicted to control, incapable of pause. His speed is his shield, his clarity a mask, and the mask sells. Such lines show Winter's flair for dramatic contrast and metaphor. He often moves from concrete anecdote or image into sweeping generalization, a style that can feel both poetic and didactic. There is an undeniable originality in Winter's approach. While his subjects, civilizational decline, social media dysfunction, loneliness, are not unique, the way he synthesizes them is. He weaves together strands of political economy, history, philosophy, technology, and spirituality in a manner that few writers do. In a single essay, he might reference ancient tribal practices, Enlightenment philosophers, TikTok trends, and personal memories. This interdisciplinary richness gives his work an intellectual orientation akin to writers like Christopher Lasch or Alasdair MacIntyre, whom he cites when discussing the loss of virtue and community. Yet his passionate, almost literary delivery sets him apart from typical pundits. Winter is not afraid to coin memorable phrases: architecture of loneliness, merchant of clarity, spectacle of dominance, and to use allegory or parable, as in the cow story in All Fours. This creativity keeps the essays engaging, even when the tone is heavy. At times, his prose can verge on overripe. A few passages read as grandiose or melodramatic, which his own neighbor character humorously notes, accusing him of loving the sound of apocalypse in his own voice. However, such self-awareness and the evident earnestness behind his words tend to win over the reader. Winter's coherence as a writer is noteworthy given the ambitious scope of his topics. Many of his essays are structured into sections or even numbered chapters, with clear logical progression. For instance, The Empire That Needs Our Silence explicitly enumerates 6 patterns of narrative, each with a heading, making a complex argument easy to follow. The Age Without Elders likewise proceeds from definition to historical analysis to modern diagnosis in a stepwise fashion. Winter's background in political economy shows in his ability to construct an argument, while his flair for language ensures those arguments resonate emotionally. Thus, his writing achieves a rare blend of analytic rigor and emotional depth. Winter's tone can also shift within an essay, from calm exposition to fiery crescendo. He is adept at using an opening anecdote or image to draw readers in, be it a woman announcing her intent to die, or a description of elders in a village, or a scene of an AI-saturated feed, then zooming out to philosophical commentary, and finally ending with a stirring call or a somber reflection. This dynamic range keeps the newsletter from feeling monotonously dire, even if the overarching outlook remains dark. It's also important to note Winter's intellectual independence. He doesn't slot neatly into left or right ideologies. He criticizes right-wing media demagogues like Shapiro for cruelty and castigates conservative faux clarity, but he also derides progressive cultural trends that he sees as performative or suppressive. At one point in the Father letter, he laments tribalism masquerading as compassion, and how voices like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan began by naming chaos, but became it in a commodified way. He stands apart as a principled contrarian, guided by a moral compass that values truth over tribe. In tone, this often manifests as lament for the entire society rather than partisan anger. Winter writes as one heartbroken by both the left and the right, indeed by the whole culture's descent into what he calls spiritual disfigurement. This gives his writing a sweeping, civilizational character. He's diagnosing the soul of the West, not advocating a policy platform. Some readers might find such all-encompassing critique lacking in concrete solutions, but Winter would likely respond that naming the truth is the first necessary step before any solution. Finally, Winter's engagement with spirituality, though largely in a cultural sense, and his frequent invocations of exile and prophecy imbue his work with a quasi-religious tone. He is not preaching religion per se. If anything, he is often critical of organized religion's failures, and he does not push any sectarian view. But his work operates in the realm of moral truth and existential meaning, much like sermons or philosophical meditations. This sets him apart from typical Substack commentators. Reading Winter feels like encountering a deeply contemplative essayist or a modern sage grappling with the end of an era. Reader, engagement, and influence. In evaluating Elias Winter as an author, we must consider not only what he writes, but how it lands with readers. Though quantitative metrics of his Substack's success are not publicly available, there are signs that Winter quickly built a dedicated audience. He launched Language Matters around March 2025, and within 3 months had published roughly 40-plus essays, an impressive output, often on a near-daily schedule. The very fact that he compiled many of these writings into a book, The Lie We Refuse to End, and promoted it on Amazon suggests a measure of confidence and interest. One doesn't release a book to total silence. Reletter, a newsletter tracking site, listed Language Matters as publishing only free issues and indicated a consistent daily posting frequency. While subscriber counts are unknown, the engagement can be gauged qualitatively through references and reception within the essays. Winter's pieces often attracted thoughtful responses and evidently spurred conversation. In Sheet Cake and Prophecy, the neighbor character remarks, "I read every word. I argue with you in my head. My neighbor across the street said your Substack gave her insomnia." This fictionalized account likely reflects actual reactions. Readers who find Winter's essays provocative, even unsettling, but impossible to ignore. His writing invites readers to wrestle with big questions, and some do find it cathartic. The neighbor confesses that a relative said the architecture of loneliness made her cry. Winter also engages the audience directly by framing essays as dialogues or responses, e.g., answering a NYT article or addressing public figures. This dialogic approach can draw in readers who are following those topics in the news. In terms of influence, Winter's newsletter is still very young, so his influence is more potential than realized. However, a few indicators of impact include a growing cross-posting of his content on other platforms. For instance, he or fans have uploaded audio versions of his essays to YouTube, and even created a podcast feed on Spotify, Apple, where the essays are narrated. The Apple Podcasts listing for Language Matters podcast shows 27 episodes, likely audio readings of his essays, and labels the content as explicit or potentially offensive. a sign that his frank style does not shy from hard truths. The presence of his work on multiple media, written, Substack, audio podcast, YouTube, indicates an effort to broaden reach and suggests that his words resonated enough to demand those formats. Moreover, Winter's work has a high engagement factor in that it asks readers to reflect deeply. While not interactive in a casual sense, the essays are the kind people discuss and forward. His subscriber base may well have included many seeking serious intellectual engagement in an era of quick takes. The intensity of his prose likely filters for readers who genuinely care about the issues he raises, resulting in a passionate niche following rather than mass viral popularity. This is a conscious trade-off. As Winter himself notes, writing when no one reads is sometimes the cost of truth-telling. In terms of writing quality and originality, Winter is undoubtedly strong. His prose is polished and evocative, arguably at a higher literary caliber than the average Substack newsletter. He demonstrates originality not just in thought, but in form, mixing genres, using narrative frameworks, etc. The coherence of his arguments and the breadth of references he marshals give his work credibility and weight. Readers likely come away feeling they have read something substantive, whether or not they agree with his conclusions. A possible critique could be that Winter's tone is too high-flown for some readers, potentially limiting his audience to those already inclined toward philosophical writing. The very features that make him original, the prophetic style, the unflinching grimness, might alienate readers looking for light commentary or pragmatic solutions. Yet Winter seems aware of this and stays true to his voice, perhaps valuing depth over breadth of influence. He is self-coherent in that regard. He doesn't dilute his message for popularity, which in turn strengthens his authenticity and likely fosters loyalty among his core readers. Finally, one measure of an author's strength is the conversations they spark. While we do not have the comments from his Substack, likely lively given the content, we can surmise that Winter's work challenges readers to examine their own beliefs. His jabs at comforting lies and calls for witness could inspire some readers to make changes in their lives, or at least to pay closer attention to the world. In one moving segment, he addresses readers directly. We must build a different language, a different platform, a different ethic, one that prizes humility over performance, remembers that speech is not a weapon, but a trust. Such appeals show Winter not just diagnosing problems, but urging readers toward higher ideals. Even if his influence is on a modest scale, those who do engage with his essays are likely influenced in a profound personal way, reminded of the value of truth, community, and moral courage. Conclusion. Elias Winter's Substack Language Matters stands out as a fiercely intellectual and emotional project, one that in a short time carved a distinct niche in the landscape of online essays. The essence of his Substack is a sobering chronicle of a civilization in crisis, combined with a personal testament of refusing to go quietly into that good night. Winter returns again and again to certain refrains: that we live amidst spiritual collapse, that our public discourse is drowning in spectacle and falsehood, that people are starved for meaning and connection, and that honest language and courageous witness are our last defenses. These themes, empire and exile, clarity and collapse, form a consistent worldview that can be challenging to absorb, yet ultimately galvanizing. Winter communicates a blend of despair and hope. Despair at what is being lost. Hope that by naming these losses, we salvage truth and integrity. As an author, Winter is undeniably formidable. His writing quality is high, characterized by eloquence and passion. The originality of his voice and the creative flourishes in his essays set him apart from cookie-cutter political commentary. He is coherent both within each piece, structuring complex thoughts lucidly, and across his body of work, hammering home a unified message from multiple angles. The cumulative effect of reading his Substack is to feel one has experienced a grand, if dark, narrative, a story of a society's downfall told by a man determined to keep the flame of truth alight. And yet, Winter also knows how to pull back the curtain and laugh at himself, as seen in his neighbor's playful scolding, which adds a layer of humility to his persona. In terms of engagement and influence, Winter may not be a household name, but he has the hallmarks of a writer who matters deeply to those who find him. He likely inspired in his readers the very clarity and critical thinking he so values. If some essays read like prophecy, others read like pleas from a friend who refuses to let you succumb to comforting lies. In the end, Elias Winter's Substack can be seen as both an indictment of a troubled era and a love letter to truth itself. A rich, thought-provoking body of work that challenges readers to see through illusions and to care fiercely about the fate of their world. Sources: Elias Winter's essays and posts on Language Matters Substack, January to July 2025, as well as his book announcement and related Substack content. These connected sources provide the quotations and context for the analysis above, illustrating Winter's key themes and style in his own words.